Right. So the question we have is, what is borderline personality disorder and how does it show up in people's behavior?
Oh, and this is another one that gets misused online, isn't it? You know, the people go, she's so borderline as kind of shorthand for moody or dramatic. But clinically, BPD is far more complex and far more serious than that.
For sure. So
Right.
borderline personality disorder sits within the cluster B
Yep.
framework of the DSM, the dramatic and emotional group. In the ICD, it's listed as emotionally unstable personality disorder, borderline type. I don't love that name, to be
No,
quite honest with
we've
you.
talked about it, haven't we?
Yeah, because I think emotionally unstable personality disorder sounds far worse than borderline personality disorder, but it's a personal preference.
Yeah.
But the hallmarks are instability in emotions, relationships, and self-image. So people with BPD often experience very intense, rapidly shifting moods, with chronic emptiness. And
Yeah.
I suppose what's very distinct about it is the overwhelming fear of abandonment.
Oh, absolutely. And that fear of abandonment drives so much of the behavior, pretty much
Yeah.
all of it, I think. Pretty much. But something as
Yeah.
small as not, replying to a message or maybe being 10 minutes late can set off either panic or fury. And you'll often see frantic efforts to keep people close, kind of clinging, begging, sometimes lashing out, sometimes threatening suicide or self-harm.
Yeah.
you know, pretty dramatic stuff. And for the person on the receiving end of it, it can feel like emotional blackmail. Well,
Because it is emotional
it is, isn't
blackmail.
it? So, if you leave me, I'll hurt myself, which is essentially trying to trap somebody into relationship. And that can be terrifying to live with as a responsibility to someone else with, living with that day to day. It's awful.
And I mean, developmentally, how it develops, it often links back to early trauma and neglect or abuse and maybe inconsistent parenting, but not always. And I
Right.
will say this. So there's this idea that it's always due to trauma. It's not.
Yeah.
Frequently, yes, but not always. But then this type of absolutism, you know my opinion on that. I don't
Well, we can't
like
do it because we can't
absolutism.
test. We can't test
Yeah.
anything. So,
You know, so when a child does grow up with unpredictable caregiving, being loved one moment and rejected the next, they learn that relationships aren't safe, and that carries into adolescence with the volatility and self-destructive behavior, and so by adulthood it becomes a fixed pattern of behavior.
right, exactly. And the relationships are the hardest part, aren't they? Because there's idealization. You're perfect. You're adored. And then devaluation. You're hated. You're betraying me. You're the enemy. It can flip in an instant, can't it? And that, for parents or, for partners rather, or children or friends, it's a real cycle of chaos. There may be shouting, threats, insults, and sometimes even physical aggression. And because those emotions are so overwhelming, the person with BPD often doesn't maybe remember or fully process what they've said or done in those moments. But for the people around them, those moments can be deeply traumatic.
Hugely traumatic. I mean, impulsivity is another piece to the puzzle. Spending sprees, for example, or drug taking, reckless sex, even binge eating.
Yeah.
These are behaviors that serve as ways to regulate emotions that feel completely unbearable and overwhelming. And self-harm is common. Now, not
Yeah.
always a suicide attempt, but often an attempt to cope.
Yeah.
But it still carries risk and creates distress for everyone involved.
100%. I mean, it's just so much to cope with. And for partners and family members, that kind of constant threat of harm, if you go, I'll kill myself, trap them in the relationship, as I said, that's
Right.
trauma bonding, the push-pull of abuse and fear mixed with these moments of closeness and comfort and love and whatever. It leaves people on the receiving end feeling helpless and walking on eggshells, never knowing whether they'll face love or rage. Which one, you know?
Mm. I think, though, it is important to note that unlike some of the other personality disorders, BPD can improve significantly.
100%.
So treatments like DPD, dialectical behavioral therapy, are very well supported by evidence, and in fact
Yeah.
was created for
Yeah.
BPD. And with support, people can learn emotional regulation, they can learn distress tolerance, and they can have healthier relationship patterns. And many do go on to live much more stable lives.
Yeah, 100%. I keep saying 100%, but it's so true. And it's really important people know that, because that's the hope, you know, because whilst BPD can be chaotic and frightening and even abusive for the people around them, it isn't hopeless, you know, and that's the thing. There is a recoverability in it. And with the right help, rather, people can change and relationships can improve, but untreated, the impact is very, very real. You know, verbal abuse, threats, manipulation, explosive rage. It's bad.
So if we explain it clinically, we're talking about instability of mood, identity, and relationships driven by a hugely chronic fear of abandonment.
Right. And in everyday life, we're talking about partners, children, and friends living on a knife edge, you know, sometimes loved, sometimes attacked, always, though, uncertain. But it doesn't have to stay that way. And with treatment, the cycle can definitely be broken.
Well, that's exactly the crucial point of it, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.